Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at Deloitte in Northern Virginia to talk to Ted Johnson, who is the lead investigator at Deloitte's Government Insights division, which comes up with smart ideas and smart solutions to big problems, right?
That's right. That's right.
One of the things, obviously, that you've been working on is the smart base concept. Walk us through, what your guys' thinking is and what the opportunity is you guys are pursuing.
Right. So the smart bases comes from the smart city concept, and the idea here is to use new technologies that are networked together, sharing information, and bring new insights, new efficiencies, streamlined processes at the city level. We want to take what cities have done and bring it onto military bases. Bases largely operate on infrastructures that are from the 1960s or older. Lots of money, lots of resources, lots of land, and lots of savings and efficiencies to be realized by bringing smart technology there.
For example, what are some of the technology? Because if you were going to design a modern city, you wouldn't probably design it like New York or
Right.
London or Washington, certainly. And that goes for these bases, some of which stretch back a couple of hundred years. What are some of the specific things that can be done on all of those metrics? What can you do rather economically right away? What are the things that will require more investment so that you can reap greater long-term savings?
Right, so things you can do right away are things like base-wide Wi-Fi access. You can network security cameras that are already in existence. But the things that military commanders are most interested in are things like smart energy, where you can become an independent power source, have your own power source independent of the local community. Right now, bases depend on those communities that live around them. If you were to install solar panels or even wind farms in some instances, but definitely solar panels or even natural resources like geothermal energy, the base now has its own source of power that it can use to power its operations, also contributing power to the local community. Should something happen at the community level, that base is now an independent power source. It has its own power source to continue operations and also support the local community.
And that's obviously the base resilience that Catherine Hammock, for example, she was the installations chief of the Army. She was focused on that issue and discussed it often. From an investment standpoint, you and I were talking a little bit before we got started, and it was about the Budget Control Act and the impact of sequestration, how it sort of stopped a lot of these investment initiatives dead in their tracks. What's the sort of investment, if you were talking, if you had Jim Mattis's ear, what are some of the things you would tell him? How much money would he have to put aside in order to address some of these broader infrastructure challenges?
Right, so if the Department of Defense decides to go it alone, a lot of upfront costs will be incurred, and I would not advise going that route. Instead, partnering with universities and private companies and using really slick financing models to have a shared cost model where the installation of sensors, solar panels, a lot of the things that make the smart tech go, sharing that financing model so that the business case for these companies is the managed service or the partnership they provide with the Department of Defense. And instead of trying to make money off the installation and the selling of devices, it's the service where their money is realized. That allows the Department of Defense to implement these things across the enormous base infrastructure across the country, even in other countries, without having to buy every single device that goes on every single building or power meter, every single solar panel. If the department wants to foot that cost on its own, it probably won't ever happen. The shared cost model is really the way that it can happen quickly and it be a more efficient installation of these technologies.
What's the sort of percentage savings that you think can be reaped, right? So, that should be the thing that attracts everybody into this. What's the kind of percentage savings that we can see?
So percentages are tough because bases they vary in size and mission. One statistic, the Army has already, from the solar panels it's already installed, has a cost avoided spending money up to about $150 million on just a couple bases. In the larger DoD structure of how much money they spend on power, maybe that's just a drop in the bucket, but for a small collection of bases, saving that much money for over the next 5 to 10 years is substantial. So again, I think in the way bases are financed, even if you save just 1% across the board, the replacement value of all the Department of Defense's real estate is something almost $1 trillion, something like $800 billion. So a percentage of that is very significant savings, even if that 1% doesn't sound like very significant.
1% of anything DoD does is significant.
That's exactly right.
But there is a lot of momentum. Obviously, base closure and realignment, that's been a taboo subject. There now looks like there's a lot more of a groundswell of support for that. Would a BRAC round be an ideal opportunity, without trying to sound like I'm making a bumper sticker for you, but does this present sort of an ideal opportunity where you're going to be doing base consolidations anyway to try to bite some of these bullets? And how much do you think that's a good opportunity to do that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, on a number of fronts. So if you are a congressman whose base is going to be closed in your district because it's underutilized or has been subsumed by some other mission, smart bases can give your base new purpose and make a new contribution to the Department of Defense. It also could be a pilot project or a model that the department uses to test out new technologies to scale out to other bases. On most bases, even though across the system they're underutilized, there are many bases that are overextended. So the mission is spread wide, but those that are taxed are really heavily overtaxed, essentially. Smart bases will help you realize efficiencies on those installations so that you make better use of your resources and your manpower. So this is the BRAC discussions. Smart base should go hand in hand with those, because in those areas where you can realize all the efficiencies and the new missions you can accomplish with this, the bases that are now underutilized can find new purpose, whether it's operationally or in a research development training mission.
I'm going to follow now in the footsteps of journalists for a long time who were always talking about the city of the future, whether it was those really cool 1930s newsreels about the city of the future, or whether or not what we saw in the 60s and what Robert Moses tried to realize in the city of the future. As you look at some of the technologies, having studied how people live, how people work, how people move around, what are some of the broad trends that we're all going to start seeing in our lives that sometimes the military is an earlier indicator and sometimes it's a lagging indicator. Right. So what are some of the things that are already happening to us around us that we might not even notice? And how are things going to be changing, say, 5 years and 10 years for all of us that in turn will then go back into the military ecosystem?
Right. So some of the things, I think smart energy is a great example of movement that's already happening that's invisible to us, because when we hit the light switch, the light comes on, and we don't understand necessarily, we aren't necessarily aware of all of the technology and things that are behind it. So whether it's coming from a traditional power plant or from solar power, it's largely transparent to us. That's already happening on military bases, and that's a real thing that military commanders have already begun to implement. But we don't want this to sound like we're trying to pitch the Jetsons and that military bases will suddenly look like Spacely Sprockets or whatever, right?
I love the Jetsons, so thank you very much for using a Jetsons. I wish I had that car, but anyway, we digress.
Yeah. But what's coming is everything is going to be connected, everything. And we are sort of used to that because we wear watches that are connected to the internet and our phones are. Now everything will be, and for military commanders, that's a huge opportunity, but a little scary too, because now these wireless sensors are a way for hackers to infiltrate your base in ways that they couldn't before. So
and persistently collect on you, right?
Absolutely, that's right. So security has to be top of mind whenever we think of anything related to smart tech in the military. But these devices are on base. Military, we already have regulations to govern the transmissions where they can and can't be used. Now it's just a matter of extending those things to incorporate all the advantages that we can get from smart tech. But it's coming, and Internet of Things is something we cannot avoid, so the military needs to get ahead of the ball in regulating that sort of thing and putting it to use.
You talked risk and opportunity, and the last question I want to ask you is, security obviously is a concern, but is that something that commercial industry is actually going to get better at security because of our needs that then gets overlaid on the DoD customer as opposed to the DoD customer being the one who ends up driving that, do you think?
10 years ago, I would say commercial companies, security would be something, an afterthought. But a lot has changed since then. So I do think that these companies are going to put security first. But for different reasons. For the private sector, it will be a matter of privacy, ensuring regular civilians that whatever you're doing on your device is protected. We'll put security protocols and encryption, et cetera. For the military, it's not about privacy. It's about hardening and making it resilient so that if it comes under attack, they can still operate. But any company that wants to do business with the military or make a dent in the commercial sector from a technology standpoint that is not pitching secure devices or secure protocols, software, et cetera, they're doomed. So, security is now a foremost concern for both the private sector and the military, where there may be a little difference, where there is difference, is convenience is sometimes prioritized over security when you're making commercial pitches. And the military convenience is, it will never overcome the security priority that we place on the devices we implement across the base.
Ted, thanks very much. Ted Johnson from Deloitte Center for Government Insights.
That's
Thanks
right.
very much.
Thank you
And a
very
special shout out to Nicole for helping make this happen. Thanks very much.